volunteers to pull it off. And so if God's speaking to you today, I would encourage you to sign up online, stop by the table on your way out, get registered as a leader because kids around here need you, all right? With that said, watch this.
Well, good morning, Crossroads Church. Good morning to you, Fort Lupton campus. Man, it's good to be here with you all. Good morning to our Thornton and our North Glen campuses as well. I'm Pastor Chris, and I'm up here at Fort Lupton campus. And this weekend, we are wrapping up this 4-week series we've been in called EMOJIS. And we've been talking about some of these difficult emotions that we deal with as human beings and how these emotions can actually affect our spiritual lives. And in fact, we would say that emotions cannot be separated from our spiritual growth. That you can't really have spiritual growth without emotional growth as well. That God created us from the very beginning with emotions, and that his intention for them is good. And so we talked about guilt and shame to kind of kick this series off, that guilt and shame are some of those emotions that we try to avoid, right, because they're negative. Nobody likes to feel that. But we also saw that those are actually opportunities for us that if we allow them to, they can propel us into a healthy community of people where we can actually find healing and forgiveness and redemption through confession and those incredible relationships that we can build. And then last week we talked about anxiety and worry and how anxiety and worry are opportunities for us to actually come to Jesus and experience a peace that we don't ever experience outside of our anxiety and worry. That we can come to Jesus and experience this peace that actually guards our hearts and minds. And this weekend, as we're wrapping up the series, we're talking about happiness. And this morning, someone came to me and said, Chris, I'm anxious to hear your sermon on happiness. And I said, well, then maybe you should go back and listen to week 3 last week and hear about anxiety. But that was just kind of funny. I won't say her name, but she is in this room, okay? But we're talking about happiness. So I want to just start off with a question. Are you happy? Are you happy? Think about it. Are you happy? Now, before we go on and before we get too far, I just want to say one thing real quickly, is that this series, for some of you I know, has brought up a lot of stuff in your life. That this series, as we've looked through and talked about emotions, that it's brought up some difficulties in your own life. And that emotions for you have been paralyzing. Maybe that's anxiety, or maybe this week as we're talking about happiness, you think, I can't be happy because I am depressed. And all I wanted to say is this, is that we know that some of you are struggling with emotions on a deeper level, in a clinical sort of way, and we understand that. And we strongly encourage counseling, which is why we have a counseling center connected to our church. That the last thing we want anyone who's struggling with these on a deep, deep level to feel is shame, that you're just not good enough, that you're just not Jesus-like enough, or that you're just not spiritual enough, which is why you're struggling with these emotions. We understand that there are very real difficulties that come along with some of these emotions, which is why we want to help you in those ways, that those things are treatable, that there is help, all right? So if that's you, just go to our website, go to crossroadsabc.com/care. And on that page, you'll see all of our information as far as getting connected to a pastor for pastoral counseling, or getting connected at our counseling center for that, okay? So that's just a little bitty side note. So let's get back to happiness. Happiness, it's one of those emotions that's really difficult to define, isn't it? It can be defined in so many ways. It can be described as peaceful or fulfilled, being satisfied. It can be described as excitement or pleasure or joy or bliss or bubbliness, right? You know anybody who's just bubbly all the time? Or contentment, right? Or delight. That happiness is emotion that has so many different ways to describe it, and it also has so many different strings attached to it. that is completely subjective to you. There are so many different opinions about it, what it is, how you get it, and at the same time, it's terrifying for us when we don't have it. And so this emotion of happiness can feel really vague. But the thing that I know that's true for all of us when it comes to happiness, for anyone who's at any of our campuses or watching online, or in fact, anyone in the world, what I know is true about every single person is that all of us want to be happy. That we all want to be happy. And not only that, but we all want our moms to be happy. Because if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy, right? I mean, we've all been there. The happiness, we all want happiness. It's the most sought after thing in the world. In fact, I would say that every single decision that you make, every single decision is in the pursuit of happiness and pleasure and to avoid pain and suffering. And I'll prove it to you with just a small example. Think about the last time you were at the grocery store. You're at the grocery store, you fill up your cart with all the groceries you need, and you get to the front of the store ready to check out. None of you went to the longest, slowest line, did you? None of you did that. In fact, we do the opposite. We get up to the front and we look for the shortest possible line, right? Because we want to avoid suffering, right? In a trivial sense, I understand. We want to avoid suffering. We want to avoid having to stand there for longer than we need to. We want happiness and pleasure, so we're going to try to get in the fastest line to get out of there as quickly as we can. And then it's funny, actually, next time you're at the store, watch this, because it's funny when you're in line. Watch other people who are doing this very thing, right? They get in line and then they look like this, and they think, oh man, I think that line's quicker. And if they have kids, they're like sending them out as spies, right? Like, you go down to aisle number 7, you go down to number 12 and check it out. If it's quicker, let me know, because we are getting in those lines. We're going to do whatever we can to get into the fast line. And then it's hilarious when they switch around and then they pick one, but it ends up being slower, And then they're just like edgy and antsy, I can't believe I should have just stayed where I was. You see, my point is this, is that we're all wired for happiness. We search for it even when we don't realize it. And we have thoughts like this. If I can only get that promotion at work, I'll be happy. If I can only get that person, that guy or that girl to like me, then I'll be happy. If I can only get a house in that neighborhood, then I'll be happy. If I can only get that scholarship to that school, I'll be happy. You see, media speaks our language, doesn't it? Everything that you see in a commercial is the best, the most satisfying, the top of the line, right? You've never heard a car commercial that says, you should buy this car. It's probably the worst one that we make, but you should buy it anyway because it will last for just a little while. I mean, you just never hear that, right? It's always, buy this car. Why? Because it is the best. It's the best. Look at all these awards that it's been given. It's the best car you'll buy. The sound system is awesome. The cup holders are great. In fact, money can't buy you happiness, but it will buy you a nice car for you to drive around while you look for happiness. Right? Media tells us that you need to get the newest phone, the newest iPhone, because it's faster and better than ever. And in fact, how have you ever lived without this new phone? That technology in general, isn't it interesting how in our pursuit of happiness, the role that technology plays? That we see people like this all the time, right? In fact, on your way home from church this afternoon, watch other drivers and just count how many people are doing this, right? Because it's Angry Birds and it's driving, right? I mean, I get it. Angry Birds is awesome, especially the Star Wars edition. You should play that. But, they're playing Angry Birds as they're driving, right? Because it's all about my amusement and my entertainment and my happiness, right? Technology has played such a huge role in our desire for happiness. We hear these messages like, buy this dream home in this dream neighborhood, and the rest of your life will feel like a vacation, right? And speaking of vacations, come to Disneyland because why? It's the happiest place on earth. So happiness is something that we look for. We all want it, and everything around us feeds this need. But here's the problem. Let's be honest for just a moment. Sometimes I'm not really sure that I can serve God and be happy at the same time. You ever feel that way? That sometimes I'm not really sure I can serve God in the way that he wants me to and be happy at the same time. And here's what I mean. The Bible says stuff like, if you follow me, deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. And we read that and we go, okay, Jesus, that doesn't sound a whole lot like happiness, does it? Deny yourself. That doesn't sound like fun. Or when Jesus says that we should love him more than the people, even in our own families. Jesus, I love them. That doesn't sound a whole lot like happiness to me. When Jesus says you need to count the cost of what it means to follow me, and honestly, that cost sounds a lot like my own personal happiness. Christianity can sometimes feel like a bunch of rules. And rules don't produce happiness. Rules feel the opposite. They feel restrictive. I don't want to do that. That I can't serve God and be happy at the same time. It's either be a good Christian or be happy. You can't have both. That being a Christian is about glorifying and serving God, which is all about duty, rules, and rejection is what we think. And to be a good Christian, we have to put our happiness on the back burner, put it on hold, and that seeking happiness and pleasure is bad. Many people have kept their faith in Jesus at an arm's distance because of this very thing. And maybe that's you this morning. Maybe you're here at any of our campuses and you're checking this out, and you are there. You're holding faith in Jesus at a distance. You're holding Christianity at a distance because you don't want to follow a bunch of rules. That you want to be happy, and you're not willing to sacrifice your happiness. That because faith is so wrapped up with laws and commandments, let's face it, that doesn't sound like any fun. I want to be happy. And so we come to this problem. We come to this issue. And maybe, again, this is you this weekend asking this question. Can I serve God and be happy? Can I serve God and be happy? And the big idea that I'm going to be talking about for the rest of our 20 minutes or so together is this. Point number 1 in your outline says happiness is good. We were created for it, and we should pursue it. That happiness is actually good, that we were created for it, and we should pursue it. Now, some of you might be thinking, especially if you've been around church world for a long time, whoa, Chris, hold on. What are you saying? Well, it sounds a lot like you're making happiness like more important than God. I mean, what about those things that God might ask us to do that aren't fun? And what do you mean that it's good, that we should pursue it? Well, let me explain what I mean, okay? We're going to be looking at several different texts this morning. The main one we're going to be in is Matthew chapter 22. If you want to follow along, go ahead and open your Bibles. Matthew chapter 22, starting in verse 36. But to set this text up, it's a text that we've all heard before. It's a text that if you've been around Crossroads for any amount of time, you've probably heard it preached on. It's an important text. And to set up the story, there's this group of Pharisees that are also called lawyers. Not the kind of lawyers that we know of today, but these were experts of the law, experts of the Old Testament law. And these people and Jesus did not get along. In fact, they always liked to follow Jesus around and try to trick him into not being able to answer a question that they asked him, or to paint him into a corner that he just can't get out of, to try to humiliate him in front of people or something like that. And this is what's going on in this chapter. All right, so we're going to start in verse 36. The lawyer came to Jesus and says this, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." And so here's the thing. You hear this and you say, see, we can't be happy and follow Jesus because look, he wants us to love him more than anything else. How am I supposed to love the things that make me happy if I'm supposed to love Jesus with all of my heart? Well, this expert in the law, this lawyer, was not only trying to stump Jesus, but he also knew something. He knew Proverbs chapter 29, verse 18, which says this, happy is he who keeps the law. Happy is he who keeps the law. So he comes to Jesus and says, okay, Jesus, out of all of them, which ones are the most important? And Jesus' response, I'm sure, was shocking to him. Jesus says, love. And I can just imagine the Pharisee, the lawyer, saying, whoa, Jesus, hold on, wait a second. I'm looking for a command. I mean, give me something good. Give me like a thou shalt not sort of thing, right? Give me a thou shalt. Give me a law about the Sabbath, or talk about the 10 commandments, or give me something that is full of duty and obligation, Jesus. And he says, no, the greatest thing is love. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and which means loving God with all of your thoughts and your desires and your volition and who you are, that every ounce of my being is what Jesus is saying, is that I should love God with everything that I am. That's the first one. And then the second one is love your neighbor as yourself. The greatest commandments. That everything else hangs on these commandments. Now I want you to pretend for just a moment that tomorrow morning, okay, if you work, all right, if you don't work, then you can put this into your own context. But let's say tomorrow morning you get up and you go to work, all right? And you go up to your boss and you say, hey, boss, it's Monday morning. We have a huge, long week ahead of us. We have so many things to do, and I'm just not sure we're going to be able to get all of them done. So let's talk through what we got to do, and maybe let's prioritize a few of them real quick, just so I know that I can get the important ones done. And let's say that your boss looks back at you and says, you know what? I want you to love me with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. Now, automatically, all of us would know exactly what is most important for us to do at that very moment, which is update your resume because your boss is crazy. I mean, who in the world would say that, right? Who in the world would have the audacity and be so egotistical and arrogant and bold to say that the most important thing you should do is to love me with everything that you have? And so the natural question here is, and maybe some of you are thinking this, but you're maybe too afraid to ask it, is God just being arrogant? I mean, is he just stroking his own ego by saying, you should love me with everything that you have? That's the most important thing you should do, that you can do, is to love me with everything. And further, Chris, not only it sounds like God being arrogant, but what in the world does this have to do with my happiness? I'm supposed to be here learning about happiness. What in the world does this verse have to do about happiness? And further, this just seems to prove my point that all it is about duty. That all this faith is about doing things. And it's all about God and not about me. How am I supposed to be happy and be a Christian? Now, here's the thing. There are certain things that we value, right? There are certain things you value. There are certain things that you value and certain things that you don't value. The things that you do value are those things that you spend time on, those things that you spend your money on. Maybe it's cars or family or boating or horses or whatever that might be, right? There are certain things that you value. For me, I value fly fishing. I love it. I just love fly fishing. I spend my money on it. I spend time doing it. I think about it. I'm a total geek kind of when it comes to fly fishing. I probably spend too much money on it if you ask my wife, right? That I value fly fishing. One of the things that I don't value is baseball. I just don't value baseball. Now, I know some of you, maybe your hearts are breaking because you think, how could you not value baseball? And I just think, well, I don't value baseball, right? Sorry, Mark Stout, if you're listening, that I just don't value baseball, all right? That, don't get me wrong. When I go to a Rockies game, which I've been to a few, I'll have fun, and I'll get a hot dog and some, peanuts and whatever, and I'll have a good time, and I'll cheer on the Rockies. I'll cheer them on so that they'll score more goals than the other team. That was a joke. But when it comes down to it, I just don't really value it. Why? Because I find no pleasure in it. Now, here's the thing. Get this, all right? God created us to want pleasure and happiness. He created us that way. In fact, our desire for happiness is healthy. It's a good thing. happiness and pleasure, hear this, ready? Happiness is an indicator of the health of your heart. It's a meter in your heart that measures how valuable something or someone is to you. Does that make sense? I don't value baseball because I don't get any pleasure out of it. Okay? And so here's the thing. Pleasure, and you should write this down. It's not in your notes, but you should write this down. Pleasure is the measure of your treasure. Those things rhymed, right? Isn't that cool? Pleasure is the measure of your treasure. You see, I don't treasure baseball, and I know that because I don't get any pleasure from watching it. Your treasure is what you love. Matthew 6:21, Jesus says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart or your love will be also." Point number 2 in your outline is where you get pleasure is where you'll find your treasure. Where you get pleasure is where you'll find your treasure. And that's always true. Pleasure and happiness is that indicator in our hearts that tells us where our treasure really is. And so back to the question, is God just being so arrogant and so egotistical that he just wants to stroke his ego by saying that we are supposed to love him with everything? The answer is no. And the reason is because he created us to want happiness. And since happiness measures what we treasure, he wants our affection to be solely on him so that our treasure follows. In essence, that he becomes our treasure. And when we do that, when our treasure is in him, then we experience the happiness like never before. Do you see it? You see, it's where our treasure is that we need to look at. That the happiness that we pursue in this world isn't necessarily wrong, but we know that it's insufficient. We know that it's insufficient when we put our treasure in the things of this world. That these things can't produce lasting happiness. And you know this if you've ever bought a new car, right? You buy a new car, right? What's the one thing everybody loves about a new car? The smell, right? The new car smell. You know, we get in and we adjust everything and we look at the cup holders, right? And we turn up the stereo and we put in our radio stations or whatever. And man, we love buying those things. And it produces in us some enjoyment and some happiness, right? But soon, we know that the tires are going to need to be replaced. And the brake pads will need to be replaced, and that your windshield wipers aren't going to last forever, right? And so it starts costing us money. We have to have service done to it. And then eventually that shopping cart in the parking lot just comes rolling right into your door. You know, if it's a nice big dent and scratch on it, we think, oh, man, what is happening? You see, the things of this world aren't necessarily bad, but they are also failing and fading away. And as a response to this, since we know that these things of this world don't keep us happy, some people take it a step further. They take it a step further with the mentality that we should achieve happiness at all costs. No matter the consequences, do whatever makes you happy. Because if it's fading, then you better get on it and get some more happiness in your life. So what this means for these people is if your spouse doesn't make you happy, then leave. Leave and go find someone who makes you happy. If you're not happy with your sex life, then go and have as much sex as much as you want with whomever you want. Find your happiness. If your stuff isn't making you happy, then get another credit card and max it out. And it's okay because then you'll have a lot of stuff that will make you happy. And if someone's in your way for happiness, just run them over because you don't have to care about other people because you're number one. Your happiness is king. And at the end of the day, when these things fade away, we can be worse off than we were before, can't we? And oftentimes, these pursuits can leave us with greater pain and suffering than what we had before. And when we look at happiness in this world, it's like a merry-go-round that's spinning so fast we can't get off of it. But unlike the things of this world, Jesus will never let you down. He will never leave you. He is never fading away. He will never leave you wanting or lacking. That is why it is so important to put our treasure in him. Psalm 16 says this, in your presence is the fullness of joy. Hear this. God, in your presence is the fullness of joy. And at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. You see, in Jesus, we find the source of true happiness, that he's never going to fade away. Now, I'm not saying that God exists for our happiness, but what I am saying is that we exist to glorify God, and we do that by how? By being happy in him. The only source of contentment, the only source of joy, of happiness. Jesus says, come to me and love me. The most important thing you can do is to love me, make me your treasure, love me with all of your heart. And there you'll find true happiness. Psalm 37 reflects this. It says this, delight yourself in the Lord. Delight yourself in him. And he will give you the desires of your heart. When I was about 10 years old, my family, we used to take road trips every year over Christmas break from school. We'd take road trips all over the place. It was a lot of fun. And one year we were down in Texas on this part of the trip, and we decided to cross the river, cross the border into Juarez, Mexico. If you've ever been to Juarez, Mexico, right? And I was excited, man. I was about 10 years old, and I was this little chubby kid with a fanny pack, right? Because that's how we did it back then. We had a fanny pack full of money. And I couldn't wait to get into Mexico and buy some stuff. I mean, I didn't even care what it was. I was just excited to go and just buy some stuff. And so we crossed the border, and we start looking around at the shops, and sure enough, I start buying all this stuff. Like, I got a few of those puppets with the strings, and make them dance and all that. And so I'm walking around with this, and then I find these really cool sombreros, like these huge ones, and I buy a couple of them. And so here I am, just picture this little chubby 10-year-old with a fanny pack, puppets, and a big sombrero, just loving Mexico, man, just walking around, just taking it all in. And then finally I get to this shop, and there's all these Rolex watches, and they're only $15. And I think, jackpot, Mom and Dad, come look at this. This is like a business investment here. I mean, look at these Rolex watches. We can buy a ton of them, take them back to the States and sell them at a huge markup, and it's going to be awesome. I want to buy some of these watches, and my parents try to talk me out of it. No, Chris, you don't want to buy these watches. Yeah, Mom and Dad, I really do. I really want to buy some of these watches. It'll go well with my sombrero. And they're like, no, Chris, you really don't want to buy some of these watches. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And they finally said, no, you don't. Because they're just not the real thing. It's just not the real thing. It's going to break. And it's going to fail you. You see, when my delight is truly in Jesus, when I love him with all of my heart, soul, and mind, when he is my treasure, then my desires begin to change and to be like his. And I begin to desire the things that he desires. And I begin to want the things that he wants. No longer looking and settling for the cheap knockoffs, but now just wanting the real thing. And so now we see no longer is it a question of either can I be happy or I'm going to serve God. But now we see that those are not mutually exclusive, but when he is our treasure, serving him produces the most amount of happiness in our lives. Glorifying him and being happy in him are together. They cannot be separated. When he is our treasure, we are fully satisfied in him. John Cusick, an author, wrote this book, and the title of this book is called Surfing for God. The Surfing for God, and that he talks about the porn epidemic. That pornography is this really big issue in our world, in our society today. And I keep a lot of these on my shelf in my office, and I give them out because it's one of the best books I've read. And he says something that a lot of other speakers and authors miss about the issue. The overall point of his book is this, is that when you're searching for porn, you're actually searching for God. That when you're searching for porn, you're actually searching for God. You just don't realize it. That God has given us, he's wired us with these desires that can often spur someone to look at pornography. These desires like acceptance or love or being desired or intimacy or joy or whatever that might be. These desires aren't bad. Seek for those. But you see, we often misplace our desires into the wrong treasures with the knockoff of the real thing. If something sinful is giving me pleasure, I'm seeking the wrong treasure. You see, the pleasure isn't the problem. The pleasure isn't the problem. It's the treasure that I place my pleasure in. And some of you are right there. Your desires are right. Your desires, your deep down foundational desires, how God made you, are right. But our treasure is often wrong. God says, come to me. Love me with all of your heart, soul, and mind. Make me your treasure because I created you. I know how you're wired, and I know how you work. I, and only I, can fulfill you. C.S. Lewis says it this way in his book, Mere Christianity, that God made us, that he invented us as a man invents an engine. A car is made to run on petrol, and it would not run properly on anything else. Now God designed the human machine to run on himself. He himself is the fuel that our spirits were designed to burn. There is no other. That is why it is just no good asking God to make us happy in our own way without bothering about him. God cannot give us happiness and peace apart from himself. Because it is not there. There is no such thing. You see, God invites us into this incredible relationship with him. Jesus says you don't have to choose between happiness and following me. That where we can finally stop wasting our time on the things that don't matter, and we can come to the one who fulfills us with lasting joy and happiness. Loving God with everything produces the most happiness in our lives, but not only do we experience the most happiness, the most joy, the most fulfillment from God when we treasure him, but when we do, he is glorified in that. You see, it's a win-win. And this is the beautiful thing, is that when he is our treasure, when we are satisfied in him, he's actually glorified by that. Point number 3 in your outline, this is John Piper's quote. He says this, God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. You see, it's a win-win situation because when my treasure is in the right place, when I'm satisfied in him and not in other things, when I find my pleasure and my fulfillment and my contentment and happiness in God, that he is actually glorified in that. Just like between a husband and a wife. When I take my wife out for dinner to a nice fancy restaurant and just celebrate her, or when I buy her flowers to express my love and joy in her, or when we sit and we talk and dream about things of the future, it's like I'm rejoicing in her. And in a way, in a sense, I'm lifting her up. I'm glorifying her, and I'm saying, hey, look, everyone, this is my amazing wife. I love her. I'm going to buy her flowers. I'm going to take her out for a nice dinner. Look, everyone, here she is. And it's the same way with God. When I'm delighting in him, I go around the world and I say, hey, everyone, you're searching for the wrong thing because, look, I found it. I found it. That this is the God you should search for. That this is the one you should find your happiness in. Look, everyone, the love of God is here, and it's amazing, and it's for you, and you'll experience more happiness than you could ever imagine. So Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That happiness is good. We're created for it. and we should pursue it. And so my encouragement to you is to go for it with all your might. Go for it. Seek to be happy. You don't have to choose between your happiness and serving him, because those who seek true happiness will ultimately come face to face with Jesus, because that's the only place it exists. Being happy in God is worship. He's glorious, isn't he? I mean, he's more glorious than anything you can imagine. Think about the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. Is it a sunrise or a sunset or a waterfall or something like that? He's the one who created those things. He's more beautiful than all of it, more beautiful than anything we could ever imagine. And the more I treasure God and the things of God, the more happiness and joy and pleasure and fulfillment I find. Jesus says this, blessed or happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. You see, it's here when we say, God, you're more satisfying than anything else. It's here where we find freedom from those sins, those habits that keep us stuck. Because no longer is it just trying to avoid them or trying to enforce our willpower to overcome them or try to trick ourselves away from them. But it's us saying, I don't value you anymore because I value him. Because in him now I'm finding freedom from this treacherous cycle of searching for happiness in this broken and dying world. So fight for joy. Fight for the right kind of happiness. That there is greater joy in God than you have ever known in anything else. You no longer have to choose between serving him or being happy. Don't give up. Don't just settle for the easy way. Don't settle for the lesser joys, for the knockoffs, but make it your aim to be a full, unashamed Christian who pursues happiness with the only one who offers true happiness. Pursue your pleasure in God. The greatest treasure that exists. And love God with all of your hearts, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your incredible love for us. God, your incredible goodness toward us. God, we thank you for your love that is freeing for us. God, your love that isn't about rules and isn't about commands, God, but it's about you and finding joy in you. God, would you help us to know what that means? God, would you help us to seek righteousness? God, help us to make you our greatest treasure. Lord, would you forgive us when we treasure other things that aren't worthy? Forgive us when we treasure those things, God, that are painful or hurtful. God, forgive us when we settle for the knockoff. God, would you help us to treasure you? Help us to love you with all of our heart, soul, and mind. God, that we would experience true fulfillment and true happiness. God, we thank you for it. Thank you that serving you is not drudgery. Thank you that serving you is not about doing it all on our own and our own strength. But God, thank you that serving you and being happy are one and the same. We thank you for it. And it's in your good and gracious name we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Oh, what a glorious day. What a glorious way. It's you that saved me. And oh, what a glorious day. What a glorious day. Yeah. So happy day. You wash my sin away. Oh, happy
Well, let's leave on that note. Will you join me in a word of prayer? Father, you are so good to us. God, I pray that for those of us in this room, Lord, who have lost our joy, who don't know where to find happiness, that you would return that joy to us. Lord, that we would see you in all of your splendor and all of your gloriousness, and that we would be able to sing, that our lives would be able to show, Lord, that today is a happy day because of the salvation that you've brought to us. God, for those of us in this room who, Lord, just need a pickup of joy, God, I pray that this morning provided some of that. That we can leave confident today knowing that we can both pursue and love you and be happy. Help us find that. Help us take that to the world. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. If you need prayer, we got people down here ready to pray for you. We'd love to do that. If you're new with us, stop by the Welcome Center on your way out. We have a gift. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Thanks for being here.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, you can take a break.
Chairs. Yeah, chairs 8 high. That would be great. Thank you.
These pieces broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed but not forsaken. I've been set free, I've been set free. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Ooh, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see it now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes, laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. You take our failure, you take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of